Hi, I'm Adam Shiva, and in this video I want to talk about the sharpening of hand tools for woodworking and simultaneously about the integration of masculine and feminine through a psychological and alchemical perspective. This comes from an experience I've been having recently where I use the things that work in my lived experience of building hand skills around construction and woodworking primarily and apply those to inner growth in psychology. It's a really fun process for me, and I also feel like it's an area where in the mind, you don't know what works often for years if the thing I'm doing is helping me. But when you're working on something physically, it's really evident that certain things work and certain things don't. And so I've been trying to kind of blend those two things together and see if they give me new perspectives. So to sharpen a tool, the thing is there are two main steps. The first is planar, which is that you have these two faces and they have to meet each other, meaning that you have to take off material in a way that that whole face of that one side of the blade is going to line up with itself, is going to be a nice, smooth, connected surface, and also that it's going to get all the way to that other surface, and that both of those surfaces are smooth and connected enough that they can then be polished, the second phase. That polishing has to do with just like sanding a woodworking project down. You start off with a coarse grit and you move step by step to a finer grit, but you do it in a way that isn't too big of jumps, meaning that each step takes too long, or too small of jumps, meaning that it takes a lot of equipment and changing what you're doing so often, which tool you're doing it with, that becomes inconvenient. So it's finding a good way to step down towards really smooth and fine. So if the two faces don't quite get to each other, then even if you polish it down really, really smooth, it's not vaguely sharp because you didn't actually establish the edge. So in the inner work, there's this aspect that I'll call masculine, but I also call it sulfur or the logos. And it's this way of feeling one's passion and one's desire, but also integrating that with one's values and what one really thinks that is worth doing, what makes sense to you, what feels like, oh, I'm not lying to myself to put these thoughts with each other. And I think that lying to ourselves or making it so my whole world makes sense as long as I don't look at these things that confuse me, and having premature answers that aren't actually adequately inclusive enough of areas that are a little different. That's like having a kind of change of angle in that masculine face, we'll say. Also having a way where you have these certain passions that come out of things you want, but that you haven't integrated that into and collected that into the part of you that is oriented towards the values of where you're trying to go in the world. So it's like there's the steed of your inner passion, of that raw sulfur, the red sulfur. And you have to refine it through this inspiration. I think motivational sort of listening is really helpful in that sulfur work. And you're getting it to fit though with the values you have. I also think that philosophy and making a way of seeing the world that really makes sense to you and doesn't involve a certain amount of self-deception, that's making that really smooth face. Then the other face that's this Mercury or the feminine or Eros is this way of collecting your feelings. And maybe there's a certain way that you feel most of the time where you're like, I'm really passionate about this. But then I have this fear around it that makes me procrastinate, and I kind of pull back in this way, and you start to just collect those feelings and start to listen to them. Hey, is my procrastination and that pulling back have to do with that I actually know that I'm going to get to this step and I won't know what to do and I don't feel comfortable until I have a better plan for that? Or is it that I like this idea except the A, B, C, I'm really nervous about step G in this process that I think might be against my morals, even though step A and B feel really, really good. So feeling and kind of gaining the knowledge from one's feelings. And I think that the way that really comes together and where those planes have to meet is that the feminine process, if it doesn't like guide what the mental process is churning out, there actually is a really big disconnect that can be really damaging. Meaning that even if something's a really good idea, if it feels bad in your body, there's no usefulness of taking even a few steps down that road. I think some of the other aspects is that there's a way that feminine work can involve like freeing yourself from the things that aren't true in yourself, but that you're like, I have to be working all the time on things that look productive for me to feel like I'm not worthless. That's one of the things I'm freeing myself from. And so that shadow work and that ability to throw off like bounds and containment, stories that really get in your way, a lot of that work, also like releasing trauma in the body, which is something I'm still trying to take steps towards. Those are steps that kind of make that feminine face really also function. Now, there's certain things like a knife or hatchet that they're really lined up with each other. And there are certain things that have apparently one bevel, like a chisel or a plane iron. And I think that when one tries to refine their process really, really focused on either the feminine or on the masculine, that there's a hope that just inside I'm a chisel. And I feel like one of the biggest things that's happened for me recently is seeing how much of myself I had left behind trying to go about it that way. And so I really encourage you to really take both of those planes. Make sure that you didn't have, a really rough back bevel, back edge on the thing that where you got one face super well polished, the other one's so jagged that the thing isn't vaguely sharp. And so the idea being that you can really aim right at what matters most to you, and you have a lot of energy of your whole spirit directed to that only when you can get both aspects of yourself really polished and brought together. I hope this is really valuable for you. I love sharing with you, and thanks so much for working on yourself and being here and trying to take on some more information for that goal. Thank you.